Hello, my name is Andrew Gabriel Roth, and for the past 25 years I've been a biblical researcher and author about the first century. Some of my principal works are right here beside me: the Aramaic English New Testament and the Wheel of Stars, which is the study of the ancient biblical calendar that preceded the rabbinic calendar. All of these things have had me delve into Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, as well as the wider historical record. But what I'm here today to do is to talk about Jerusalem and the Lost Temple of the Jews, which is a brand new DVD coming out. And I had a bit of a history with this material that I wanted to share with all of you, because I had my own scholarly journey to go on to come to where I am now. As Ken Klein will explain in the DVD, Jewish tradition is vehement and unmovable on the idea that the Temple Mount is under, that the original temple rather, is under the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And any discussion to the contrary will be met with immediate isolation and exclusion. I come out of this tradition, and I know exactly what Ken Klein is talking about. But in addition to having to overcome that Jewish training, I also had to overcome a bit of a scholarly disagreement that I had with the author of this work, the late Dr. Ernest Martin. Dr. Martin had written a book in 2002, I believe, called A Star That Astonished the World, and I had a lot of disagreements with it. A friend of mine, though, wanted me to assess this DVD because he said to me that if this was right, the entire future history of the world could change. And I agreed with him. But I said, well, I'm not sure. So I had to overcome my own predispositions, as well as my Jewish tradition, to try to understand this great mystery. Where was the lost temple of the Jews? Well, when I played the DVD, the first thing that stood out for me was a statement by Ken Klein that people were not listening to Josephus. Josephus, critical historical witness, someone that I read and research almost every day of my life. Josephus is descended from priests and kings on both sides of his family tree and is our best eyewitness to the first century. The times of Yeshua, or Jesus of Nazareth, the times of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. And so when I realized that the current temple models were not listening to Josephus, I needed to listen again. I tested all the claims that Ken Klein made. I read the original Greek, I read the English, and I concluded that Dr. Martin had correctly assessed Josephus. And therefore, the Temple Mount was in the wrong place. Now, there's a lot of evidence in this DVD. I can't possibly go over all of it. But for me, one of the defining pieces of evidence was when we found Hezekiah's tunnel, the water source is going so far away from where the temple was supposed to be as to make it impractical. If you've got 2 million Jews that need to ritually cleanse or mikvah themselves every time they go for the temple, then it makes sense to have the temple line up with where Hezekiah's water tunnel ends. But the current location for the Temple Mount is a third of a mile in the opposite direction. Between that and the geographic crescent moon feature mentioned by Josephus that pinpoints the real location, I became convinced that Dr. Martin was right and that centuries upon centuries of Jewish tradition was incorrect, which was not an easy thing for me to admit. But even now, the real ramifications have not really been discussed, either by Ken Klein, which I think is to his credit because he wants to keep restrained, or by my friend who brought me the material in the first place. This is what I wanted to share with you in my closing thoughts on the importance of this study. There was a gentleman, or I should say a high priest and a king named Simon the Hasmonean, who cut down the real Mount Zion and who sanctified the area for where the temple was. That area is not under Arab control, that area was never redefiled. So it is still sanctified to this day. Now, why is that important? It's important because the Jewish people can rebuild on that sanctified ground the right place for their temple. They can rebuild it tomorrow. And there is absolutely nothing the Arab authorities in the Middle East can do about it. In addition to that, what you all need to understand very, very clearly is that that means the entire infrastructure of Israel can come back, including the priesthood, because it was already sanctified by an accepted authority while the Second Temple was standing. And that has been the big challenge for Jews today, to try to reconstruct things. There is a Sanhedrin, for example, that's been reestablished in Jerusalem, but many Jewish authorities don't accept it as credible because the previous Sanhedrin was dissolved in 359 CE. And that Sanhedrin could not officiate and inaugurate this current one because of the gap in the centuries. But with Simon the Hasmonean certifying and sanctifying that land from Second Temple times, all of it can come back exactly as it was in the time of Messiah, exactly as it was before the Romans destroyed everything in 70 AD. This is an amazing study, and it leads to perhaps the most important question for our times. If our God has preserved his word, why wouldn't he preserve his land? Why wouldn't he preserve and allow for the temple to be rebuilt? Because when that happens, it will usher in the return of Yeshua, or Jesus, the Messiah. And that is something worth waiting for. So that's what I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you for your very kind attention. I'm Andrew Gabriel Roth. Shalom.